You possess an inner fire that never really goes out, but it may flicker or dim. However, there is always waiting, and when you least expect it, a thought occurs. It adds fuel to your flame, which you may already believe is a challenge that turns into the spark. You are aware of your own limitations and have marked the boundaries of your strength. However, let me clarify that what you think is a surface underneath that surface has untapped power and unrealized potential. Something inside you doesn't break. In fact, it could become quiet, even if it may seem far away. The part of you that never stopped exists. Whether you realize it or not, is still there when things become dark. You've barely touched the surface of what most people can accomplish in their lifetimes. They are trapped in a version of themselves that isn't even close to their greatest potential. They accept limitations that have been imposed upon them. But what if those limitations weren't really in place? What if your uncertainties, fears, and setbacks weren't reflections of who you are? However, are tests meant to awaken your inner self? Do you consider you have seen what you are? Below the noise of overthinking and underestimating, you haven't is that version of you and a deeper, self-calm focused and unshaken. It is based on the inner strength that the Stoics discussed, which is neither loud nor ostentatious. The real Marcus Aurelius said, just stable grounding. You will find strength if you realize that you have control over your thoughts and not external circumstances, not the surface level stuff, but that strength is what we're going for today, the truth. And if you feel like you're prepared to put an end to your doubts and begin becoming, if so, stick with me, because this video could be the spark that makes everything brighter once again. One easy free favorite. If you think this is the right kind of space, let me know if this resonates. That subscribe button is more helpful than you may realize if you want to grow in it. Let's get started. What makes you doubt yourself? Not due to your incapacity, because somewhere along the line, you forgot how much. Not because you're broken. You've already overcome a lot of doubt on your own, and it doesn't stem from weakness. It results from losing contact with the aspect of yourself that has been manifesting day after day. Without acknowledgement, approval, or validation, that part of you that left your bed when your mind screamed to stop, everything felt heavy and continued to go forward. When you were silently carrying what seemed like the weight of the world, you were smiling at other people. Because of their training, most people never see that strength in themselves, not because it doesn't exist. You weren't born doubting yourself. Instead, you learned to be cautious. Like a second language, it was gradually picked up via the subtle cues to keep yourself safe. Keep your hopes down. It's not your fault whether it began at home, at school, or when you saw others being punished for standing out. However, once spoken, it is now your responsibility to unlearn it. We are what we do excellently repeatedly, so it's not an act, but a habit. What have you been doing over and over again? Letting go of yourself. Another guess. Are you small? But behind all of that uncertainty, there is something. Another voice, a quieter one that doesn't yell, is always there. However, whistles at the appropriate times, that voice emerges when the distractions subside. The one who asserts that I am more than this, and that this isn't who I am, ever felt it rising while you were silent. A S-truth, not as ego. Additionally, if that voice has persisted, despite your efforts to silence it for years, despite your fear and overthinking, you had the strength to go through it. There have been times when it would have been easier to quit, but you've endured more than you realize. Even on nights when you carried a storm within, the sky seemed clear the next morning. That is not weakness, rather, it is resilience, grit, and proof. I am what I choose to become, not what happened to me, wrote Carl Jung. Even in silence, you've been making decisions that are influencing who you are. Your lack of memory, you've forgotten your own evidence, is the issue, not your lack of confidence. Ignored the strength that was buried in those routine, unremarkable days when you continued to go when nothing made sense. You moved on after adapting and healing in pieces. That kind of strength just gets ignored by us. It doesn't vanish. Compliments are dismissed because we are taught to trust criticism more than capability. After accomplishments are shown, a quiet narrative gradually emerges. Someone who claims, "I'm not good enough," even when the evidence suggests otherwise. According to Socrates, an unexamined life is not worth living. However, if you never stop to think about anything, the majority of your suffering starts with your unexamined self. Now that you've conquered, how can you have faith in your future abilities? At one point, you felt unstoppable. You were in touch with a deeper truth, not because life was perfect. Perhaps you were a child who ran fearlessly and spoke without apologies. Alternatively, there may have been a fleeting moment of hardship when something inside of you stood tall and steady, displaying clarity rather than ego. That spark didn't burn out. It didn't go. That was you. The criticism you didn't deserve was just buried behind the opinions you never asked for. The mistakes you thought were definitions and the noise of life's fog. It was just more difficult to hear yourself because of the pressure and expectations. But let's be clear, you just stopped feeding it and started a real fire instead of losing it. The kind that refuses to go away and resides in your chest. It is not easy to die. It retreats and waits instead of leaving with a single setback, or perhaps 1,000. Until you're ready to remember that it never went away, it lingers. All it takes is a decision, not a loud noise. Not in some idealized version of yourself, but a quiet, firm decision to believe once again. However, Carl Jung said that your vision would become clear because it has always been there. You can only see beyond your dreams when you can look inside. Who looks inside and realizes the invincibility you once experienced? Speaking openly in front of the world, that wasn't a dream. It was your heart. Gave you grounds for doubt. So maybe it's time to stop searching for confirmation. Moreover, you are not beginning again when you begin searching inside for recognition. You are not broken. Rather, you are buried under tales that you never had the courage to tell. Let them go and claim the voice that is certain without having to be loud. The one that whispers, "I am just remembering, not done." Rarely is the loudest person in the room the strongest. Volume is not the same as power. Is it really strength that covers insecurity? It goes away without notice. Building genuine confidence isn't loud. Therefore, it doesn't want to be seen. It's quiet, still, and unmoving. And the person watching isn't creating a scene. You've been conditioned to believe that if no one notices, you're the one making progress. The fact that it didn't happen, if you didn't post about it, doesn't matter. But that isn't growth. That's performance confidence, which is about knowing something rather than proving it. And you just need to keep showing up until you realize you don't need anybody else to notice. Day after day, when nobody is cheering and the spotlight isn't there. According to Plato, true power emerges when it's only you and your work. I would add that a man's measure is what he does with his power, especially when no one else is around, because eventually the world will notice. But the version of you, if you're building anything, you should be the first to notice. And nobody notices it yet, so let them overlook you and miss it. One day, they will ask how you got there, so let your discipline disturb them, and let your silence confuse them. However, your response will have to be included in the results by then. How many times have you told yourself that your answer is, as soon as I'm ready, I'll try? You may not have spoken it out, but you have thoughts about it. That before you take that leap, you need to feel more prepared, experienced, and confident. Readiness, however, you shouldn't wait since it doesn't seem like a guest. Something you don't think about is who rings the doorbell and announces its own readiness. However, by doing so, you won't become ready and then take action. You take action, and by doing so, you prepare everyone you admire. All of the stories that inspired you started with hesitation rather than certainty. They started off scared, but they didn't let that stop them. They kept moving, and in that movement, they adopted the idea that we learn by doing rather than by waiting, as stated by Aristotle, not by questioning, but by confronting the very thing that frightens us. Fear has a clever disguise. It often assumes the appearance of logic and advises you to exercise caution. A better time to collect more information, get more approval, and feel more prepared. If all of that was just a polished accent speaking fear, suppose that hesitancy, is it paralyzing you rather than protecting you? Considering your future self, the more grounded, capable, and fulfilled person isn't waiting for the ideal opportunity. Now, it's calling you forward from the one spot where you're most unsure. If you're terrified, it's good to know that you're alive. Discomfort is a sign that something important is approaching. It's not a red flag. Standing at the intersection of your current self and your future self, you are on the brink of growth, and you act your way into it, not waiting to be deserving of that transformation. Worthiness must be earned in the trenches of uncertainty. It is not something that is handed to you. You don't find your confidence in the decisions you make when nothing seems certain, and then show up. You show up frightened and unprepared, and you do this again. Every time you say, "I can't," your nervous system becomes more self-assured. It accepts the order and starts firing itself without arguing or fact-checking. Your body stiffens and your breath shortens around that limit. If you repeat it often enough, your mind starts to question its expectations. As soon as your actions begin, it becomes more than just a belief. The tricky thing about doubt is that it doesn't shout, so you have to follow without question. It whistles rather casually. Maybe I'm just not suited for this. It's probably too late for me, but I've never been good at that. It sounds like you, and it makes sense. However, it is fear that is disguising itself as rationality in order to get past your guard. What if, instead of treating your thoughts as truth, you began to treat them more as suggestions? What if you asked them questions out of curiosity rather than fear? Until you make the unconscious conscious, Carl Jung's writing will guide your life. And you'll call it fate, since the majority of us are being guided by ideas we never made. Teachers pass them on, but they were never challenged or examined. The voices of our parents' culture that become our internal narrative before we. The next time you hear that inner voice, say something like, "I didn't even know we were allowed to question them." Stop, don't absorb it, and ask whose voice it is. You're not enough. Are you speaking from a place of exhaustion because you're tired? Is it the projection of someone else? Something is still there in your system from years ago. Because once the source is identified, you have lost its hold. You are the one watching them, not your thoughts. You have power because you are the thinker rather than the thinker. To choose which thoughts stay, not to control every thought that comes your mind, is a sacred place where you keep the things you build your life around. And it collects clutter, self-doubt, fear, shame, and like your home. When left unchecked, they accumulate, but you may clean it and develop mental, be intentional, and use questions to replace noise with clarity assumptions. The moment you stop being an echo, you may begin to judge yourself by understanding your power. Then begin acting as the author, editor, and person who selects the script. You scroll and stare instead of just repeating the one that was handed down. In precisely filtered moments, you see them building success and glowing with success. And you unintentionally begin to think less physically, but more emotionally. You compare their victories to your doubts and their miles to your mess on an inside level. You're behind the scenes in their highlight reel. And all of a sudden, it seems like you're falling behind in a race. You were running without even realizing it. But the truth is that comparison is a powerful tool. It requires your attention, gratitude, and momentum. It doesn't just steal joy and exchanges it for feelings of anxiety, jealousy, and a quiet sense of inadequacy. What's the worst part? The majority of it isn't true. You're comparing your whole humanity to another edited glimpse of your difficulties to a current success. The Stoics clearly saw that this was an unfair battle from the beginning. They believed that living well was more important than having a lot of possessions. We should never attach our value to things that are beyond our control. Epictetus taught us. He said that the only worthwhile objective in life is freedom, especially not other people's accomplishments. It's achieved by ignoring things that are out of our control. And yet, every time we use someone else's progress as a guide for our own, we give up our inner peace. However, you are on your own path, which has its own rhythm and pace, and you are not behind it. And it taught you that you were never supposed to keep up with anybody else's schedule. Aristotle felt that every person had a unique purpose, which he called telos. It's like planting a tree and expecting it to bloom like a flower when you try to replicate someone else's purpose. It isn't incorrect. You aren't the only competitor that matters. Are you learning with the person you were with yesterday? Are you expanding? Are you even attempting a little amount? If this is the case, you are not losing. Rather, you are growing and making progress in self-awareness. Moreover, little actions have greater significance than any spotlight moment ever shared online. What you believe you need at this moment is memory, not a pep talk, not more motivation. Just a silent, sincere reminder of what you've already accomplished, not a brand new mantra. Because you'd realize you've survived if you can look back and see it clearly. You should give yourself a lot more credit for the days that broke you. However, you weren't taken aback by the nights you woke up with uncertainty in your chest and still got dressed. When it would have been easier to quit, you continued. That's your resume, not your titles. Your perseverance is your proof, not your metrics. Resilience is a daily decision, not a unique gift that only the strong are born with. When everything in you tells you to stop, it's the decision to keep going, even when things don't make sense. And you do not answer quietly, but it is engaged in the fatigue, proven in the face of failure and refined in the face of fear. According to Plato, courage is knowing what not to fear, but maybe true courage is facing everything. You're stronger than you think you are because someone told you so, but you're still walking through it. However, you've developed the kind of strength that doesn't get noticed since you practiced it when no one else did. Shared on social media in a way that lacks recognition or rewards. The kind of people that lived in private behind closed doors during difficult times you didn't think you'd survive. However, did you know that confidence is born, not in speeches or praise? However, you have the ability to get back up when life knocks you down. Your confidence is something you earn in the dark, not something you develop when it's easy. The mind may serve as both your battlefield and your sanctuary. It's not only where your thoughts are alive, it's also where chaos arises or clarity takes root. It is the foundation of your future. And more often than not, it is not the real issue. It is the way your mind tells the story of those problems, the part of your life that undoes you. The spiral starts with the spin, the fear, and the assumption. The unexamined life is not worth living, according to Socrates. But what about the unexamined thought? You repeat that one sentence to yourself repeatedly, without even realizing that you're not ready. These quiet phases go unchecked, and I always get the feeling that they're better than me. Become the character you play out day after day, because they are familiar, not because they are true. However, you have the option to reclaim the gate and cease allowing all thoughts to enter unchecked. You may take control of your thoughts and decide what should remain. That starts in stillness and what is questioned and rewritten. Not necessarily silence, but awareness that creates space between thought and belief, stimulus and response. Start belief audition to understand them, not to pass judgment. Where did they come from? Where did you get them? Are they actual or just outdated programming? People were warned by Carl Jung, will do whatever it takes to avoid facing their own souls, no matter how crazy. However, facing your thoughts is not a glamorous process. Rather, it is the first step toward freedom. However, a liberating one is to speak to yourself in a clean mental language. Like someone else, you are accountable for your journal. Not to impress, but to clearly show who you are. To move toward what can be. Stop writing what you hope is true and start writing what is. Use intention practice, thinking to train your mind, not just content. The reason for this is because a trained mind doesn't panic when faced with a challenge. It pauses, it filters, it doesn't react to every viewpoint, and it lacks phase control. It looks for clarity. A trained mind will protect you, but it won't solve every issue. From the worst ones you've created, you've tied your value to results. Give the job the number of applause you've been hoping for. I hope that they would reflect back the validation you have been seeking, as if they were mirrors, and when they didn't, you began to doubt yourself, assuming that the outcome wouldn't be favorable. The truth is that the results are false, but you must not be either. They are shaped by timing and luck, by factors beyond your control. So they don't always tell the whole story. Additionally, you will die by them if you live by them. One high will never be sufficient. You will remain trapped in a cycle of chasing worth if you experience one failure, which will seem like a verdict. The Stoics knew this for a long time, from things that were never intended to define you. Marcus Aurelius did not gauge his life by battle victories prior to algorithms and awards. When he received praise from the Senate, he evaluated it based on whether his actions were in line with virtue. Originated from integrity rather than pressure, and they thought power wasn't involved in the result. However, as Epictetus said throughout the process, do not expect everything to go as planned. Instead, Hope that everything goes as planned so that you may be content. You are not your victories. That is peace, not passivity. In the face of both, you are the effort rather than the echo. You are who you are, not your losses. The decision is misunderstood, not the result of detachment. Real detachment indicates that you care deeply, despite what other people believe. When things don't go your way, you just don't give up. You give it your all and fully commit. However, you refuse to let the outcome dictate your value. It is not apathy. Rather, it is mastery. You can give your everything and still be okay if you love something and don't care about the result. That is the kind of strength that isn't affected by external changes if it doesn't land. The myth is that you don't need to jump since it's anchored in internal stability. That metamorphosis occurs in a single huge movie scene when everything changes. Additionally, the music is great, but growth isn't a one-off act in real life. You don't need to see the whole staircase. It's a series of modest, sincere ones. All you have to do is take the next step, the one that seems difficult and is directly in front of you. However, genuine courage is not always a heroic or grandiose speech. Sometimes courage means whispering no when your whole body wants to say yes. Just so you know, sometimes it's writing a single, accurate sentence when you're unsure about it. Sometimes all you have to do is get up, place your feet on the floor, and face the day. Once said, even when everything inside of you wants to vanish, conquering oneself is the first and greatest victory. Yet it doesn't happen all at once. Even when fear is more intense, it manifests itself in quiet, repeated decisions to act honestly. You develop a new identity by presenting yourself as someone, not by creating one overnight. A little more resilient than you were yesterday. And each time you make a little but effective change, you begin to see yourself differently, not as someone who is always doubting, but as someone who takes action regardless. And once you begin to believe that you are capable and courageous, even in the little things, everything changes at that point. Because identity shapes action. And when action reinforces identity, it turns into a loop that you can manage. When no one is looking, who are you? When the other side is not recognition, waiting just you, your decisions, and the silence, no praise, no reward, that surrounds them is where self-respect is developed. In shadows, not under lights, not while you're performing, but when you're just quietly living your life, moment by moment. When people are paying attention, it's simple to be assertive and speak clearly. When there is applause, what is the tractual transformation? It occurs when you select to act morally, even when no one will ever understand, when your behavior is consistent with your values. You know because you see, not because someone may notice. The soul is dead, according to Socrates, and that knowledge becomes your compass. Its thoughts color, but it's also influenced by its habits and the things you do repeatedly. What determines your inner architecture is when you have nothing to gain. You develop self-confidence by being consistent in the dark, not by talking big, by keeping your private promises to yourself. Because of that consistency, that quiet devotion to your own values is where your unshakable self lies. When you learn to show up without a witness, you are born with respect. When your strength turns inside, you stop performing and no longer need to prove yourself. You just are. And even the loudest criticism occurs when that occurs. Begins to seem like background noise that is momentarily irrelevant and powerless. Quit shrinking and stop removing parts of yourself to make other people feel better. And quit apologizing for your want to reach out to others. Being honest is not a sign of dishonesty. Rather, it is a sign of clarity. You know deep inside that you're meant for something more significant. Yet somewhere along the line, you learn that striving made you egotistical and that having confidence made you dangerous. Real humility doesn't ask you to disappear. That was never about you, but rather about their comfort. It asks you to remain rooted, which means presenting your gifts with grace rather than concealing them. According to Socrates, you should think for yourself when you do. You'll see that humility is moving forward without having to be the loudest. It's not looking back. Courage in the room is about being there, not about making noise. Even when it's not popular, it's choosing to live in accordance with what matters most. You don't have to pay attention to yourself when things are difficult, but you should stop acting that way. Your voice is consequential. You were created to contribute, not to blend in with the background. For the purpose of demonstrating what integrity looks like in a noisy world. And it means being grounded, not being aggressive or ostentatious. Living a dignified life, acting with intention, and calmly and firmly defending your values. To be powerful, you don't need to be praised. To be important, you don't need to be honored. Your worth is determined by how faithfully you show up, not by how much praise you get. Day after day, fear is not the enemy. It never was, for the things and people that are important. Fear itself isn't what holds you back. Rather, it's how tightly you hold on to it. How often do you accept it without question? And how silently do you allow it to influence your decisions? The only time fear becomes an issue is when you allow it to control you without ever questioning where it is leading you. In the places you avoid and the stories you don't confront, it grows strongest in silence. Sit with it, talk to it, and challenge it. What am I really afraid of? Is it a failure specifically, rather than in a vague sense? Are we missing things? Is it necessary to start again and acknowledge that the previous path wasn't the best one for you? Most of the time, our fears aren't even about death, but rather about ego or discomfort. Uncertainty is present in a way that is beyond our control, yet that is precisely where growth occurs. According to Carl Jung, if you are afraid, it is not a stop sign. It highlights the aspects of your life that are still subject to limitations. If something both excites and frightens you, use that instead of freedom. Keep your eye on the edge of your potential calling. If you're not there, occasionally, if everything seems comfortable and familiar, you're probably not developing. Growth occurs when you are willing to go forward, rather than when you are fearless. Therefore, instead of waiting for the day to arrive, stop waiting to feel fearless. Learn to face your fears head on, rather than hiding behind or under them. Allow it to serve as a signal, rather than a sentence, teaching you that discipline is not punishment. It's not about being hard on yourself or denying yourself joy. It's not about restriction. It is the quiet power of structure. It is the opposite of liberation. Knowing that you can rely on yourself when things become loud gives you freedom. When everything around you seems out of control, you feel messy or uncertain. When you train your mind to focus, discipline is the steady rhythm that keeps you thinking about it. When you choose consistency above comfort, you move your body even when you don't feel like it. By creating space inside your life and communicating with your nervous system, you are not restricting it. Do we have a trust for this and that? That is stability and peace. It's a visitor, so it comes and goes, but that's strength motivation. The thing that keeps you going when motivation wanes is discipline. When inspiration wanes, it serves as a reminder that your value isn't determined by your emotions. Aristotle said, "It's built on the choices you make over time." We are what we do excellently, time and time again. But a habit makes your routines meaningful, rather than monotonous or flawless. However, consciously allow them to serve as your ancestor and reminder, since on the days when uncertainty creeps in, everything becomes hazy and you lose sight of who you are. Because I stand up for myself, those routines will speak for you and say, "I know who I am." And that discipline is a daily act of self-respect more than anything. You've been waiting for the ideal moment and mood, and you've waited too long to feel prepared. Someone else's green light that says, "Now you can start." But readiness isn't a feeling. It's something you create by moving forward, even when your legs are shaking. Something that magically appears. In fact, you're already changing in a noticeable and dramatic way. Quietly, daily in the moments, everyone notices. Where you select ease of patience over reaction, effort over excuse, and integrity. Throughout all of your decisions, nobody stood up for the ones you didn't post about. The people who shape you are the ones you weren't even sure mattered. The version of yourself that moves with confidence, clarity, and inner steadiness is the one you admire. They're not that far from fantastic. They're already inside of you and aren't waiting for the finish line. The privilege of a lifetime, as stated by Carl Jung, is waiting to be uncovered, is to stop running from being someone else in order to become who you really are. When you are at your most honest, that version of yourself is close to who you already are. They are so much closer than you would think. One aligned choice away. One brave moment is one step closer to the goal you've been putting off. And when you finally realize that growth is already taking place, you stop underestimating that truth. Everything changes inside of you, not because the world changes, but because you do. You begin walking with purpose and cease waiting for permission. As soon as you start acting like the person you've always been capable of being, there is no turning back. You are neither broken nor behind. Every day, you are evolving in ways that the world may never see. However, your future self will appreciate you, continuing to use the quiet strength you are now developing. If this resonated with anything genuine inside you, it will speak louder than anything you've ever spoken. Right now, there is another video on screen that will develop you further. Use it as your next step. We appreciate your presence and participation in Stoic Journal. This space isn't about perfection. It's about quiet power and progress.